January 6, 2024. Okay, I'm getting back to the situation here in the Russia-Ukraine war here. Before I get into that, I do want to mention that, as I predicted, the Supreme Court is taking the case about Trump being removed from the ballot in Colorado. So, but anyhow, back to uh, the uh, the situation in Ukraine here. Recent developments have kind of stirred a bit of an escalation in the missile combat. And on the ground, I think things have been kind of chugging along just like they were, maybe slowed up a little bit by weather conditions. But effectively, the Russians are continuing to advance very slowly and very carefully, and areas where the Ukrainian defenses are weaker, perhaps. And the claims are that the Ukrainians, because of the lack of additional funding from the U.S., particularly the supply of artillery rounds has been low, so they're having to use them sparingly, but they're not out of ammo completely. So it's an ongoing battle there. But the missile warfare has kind of been the big escalation recently because I guess first of all, there was a series of missile attacks by Russia on Ukraine, and then Ukraine retaliated by bombing Belgorod in the daytime with cluster munitions, obviously targeting civilians directly, which is a war crime, of course, but that war crimes are not unusual in this conflict. So the Russians are claiming they're not doing it deliberately, but they're probably killing at least as many civilians due to legitimate collateral damage, since they have more missiles and coming in and so forth. So as far as the civilian death toll, but nobody's going to actually hold the Ukraine to account for anything like that, obviously. And Russia's kind of, well, in its own status anyhow. But like I said, that's but then this was followed by a massive Russian missile attack after that Belgorod thing, which apparently did some significant damage to some of the Ukrainian war production. They have domestic production of certain things themselves, and apparently they were attacking that directly, as well as certain military headquarters and so forth. It's hard to know. You kind of get these different reports from both sides, and they're both slanted to say that they're doing the most damage. So you have to view reports with caution, but it seems like that's a fair assessment considering the amount of weapons involved. Well, if you like these videos, please give me a like. That helps out with the algorithm. And thanks to whoever joined me recently. Appreciate that. Another one there. And of course, we will. You can subscribe if you haven't already. And also, if you're on Rumble, I post this on Rumble, so the Rumble people, you can subscribe over there if you're not on YouTube, or subscribe on both. Yeah. So anyhow, like I said, but another development is that Russia's now fielded a short-range ballistic missile from North Korea. They've got a supply of the North Korean missiles as well as the artillery shells. And this missile has a range of about 900 kilometers, which is actually longer than the Iskander, which the Russians make, because the Iskander, which I think is about a 500-kilometer range missile, is designed to conform with the INF Treaty. Whereas the North Koreans were never a member of the INF Treaty, so they don't have to conform to it, and they didn't. So these missiles have now been deployed, which gives more ammunition to the Russians, and also they have the advantage of being able to be launched from a greater distance, and of course that means they're less likely to be preempted or by a Ukrainian attack. So that is a significant development. Also, there have been attempts by the Ukrainians apparently to launch drone attacks on factories where components of the Iskanders are built. So I don't know exactly how effective those attacks have been, but they obviously did some damage. And so that's one thing. Did they just damage the building a little bit, or did they really knock out the production machinery or really disrupt production in a major way? That's unclear. But we know that in the past months that these sort of attacks are made. It's possible that the North Korean missiles are just being brought in to provide more ordnance, more numbers. So that's kind of a development that happened, and it's hard to know exactly what the level of damage was, but apparently it wasn't trivial. And that posed another issue. This longer range North Korean missile will probably give the Russians ability to target bases from which the future uh, Ukrainian F-16s will be deployed, and be able to reach those bases and attack them with missiles, so from a distance. So that's a factor. On the Ukrainian side, however, not to be outdone, they apparently managed to have an infiltrator somehow got fairly deep into Russia and allegedly set a Su-34 on fire. And I'm sitting there going, sometimes these Russians amaze me at their kind of, I don't know. I mean, they have an air base and it doesn't have security around it. I mean, all of our air bases have security around them. I think an infiltrator would be hard pressed to get into one of our air bases and set one of our fighter planes on fire. I kind of think. It's just amazing to me that if this is true, which apparently it is, at least that's being reported that way, and nobody's denied it. So I guess it happened. But that's one of their coups. Of course, we know that they a while back they blew up this Russian ship, which was loaded with missiles at a port with a storm shadow. So, and I think to some degree this escalation may have been planned anyhow. So that's kind of the thrust of the conflict. On the other hand, in Robotyne salient, which was the major offensive success of the Ukrainians during the summer and fall war that they were waging there, it looks like the Russians are starting to make inroads into pushing the Ukrainians back, and apparently it seems like they've pushed them back behind the first line of defense that they had somewhat penetrated slightly. They got in between the two different lines there, and pushed them back. I think north of the Dragon's Teeth, it looks like. So, and they're attacking on the flank up there. But the reason why they're having some success is because the offensive at Avika, I think is how you pronounce it, down on the kind of the elbow side over there of the eastern side of the Avtika, that's it. But that they've had to deploy several of their more elite brigades that were involved in the offensive to counteract the Russians in that area, and maybe have slowed them down quite a bit, because the Russian advances there have come to pretty much a crawl. Not that they're not advancing a little bit, but it's a crawl. But that's required the use of these elite units over there, which now is leaving that the success of the summer somewhat exposed. Meanwhile, a limited number of Marines on the Dnipro River are holding out still, but does seem like Russian attempts at bombing. We reported earlier, and I think it seems to hold up that perhaps about 5 Russian aircraft were shot down, presumably because the Ukrainians had deployed a Patriot battery in range of that river, and managed to shoot down these airplanes. So the Russians have called off those strikes and are relying now more on their drones to attack the Ukrainian positions on the other side of the bank of the river for now. And it's unclear whether or not the Russians were able to successfully target the Patriot battery in question or not. Some reports suggested yes. There was an attack on a train station, and so it's sort of one version of it is that they just attacked a train station and killed some innocent people and wounded a whole bunch. The other is that they were actually loading the Patriot system on the train to remove it from the area, because basically it accomplished its mission, and they wanted to get it out of there before somebody found it and maybe move it back to a more strategic base inland, maybe around the capital or a major other military facility. Unknown which ones that would be. And so it's unclear whether they did successfully target the system or not. But the Russians seem to be a little bit more careful about the use of their bombers as that far forward. In fact, one of the consequences of this conflict, to me, it looks like that the fourth generation aircraft are becoming fairly obsolete in this environment. I mean, anytime you attempt to use them at all, you end up getting a bunch of them shot down. The missiles today, anti-aircraft missiles, are just a lot more effective than they used to be. And so we'll have to see how that develops. Um, but that's kind of the situation as I see it now. It doesn't look to me like the Russians are going to be able to completely rout the Ukrainians or anything like that anytime soon. But on the other hand, there was another recent development is apparently Zelensky was making some speech demanding a massive mobilization of 500,000 more people and seemed to be getting a little bit, from the way it's being reported, a little bit frayed about the whole subject. It may well be that they're starting to develop some opposition in this conflict, that as more and more people are pressed into service, the people are just getting a little tired of this conflict. And at the same time, there are reports that the people that are being conscripted and sent into NATO bases in Europe for training, the trainers in Europe apparently reporting that the quality of the recruits, that these people that haven't really had anything like decent basic training, that the idea was to get them at more advanced combat training to prepare them for battle, sort of like, I guess, what we would say in the U.S. military would be basic training versus advanced individual training, something of that sort. I don't think we're talking anything on the level of range or anything like that. We're just talking a bit more, squad and platoon tactics, that sort of thing, I believe. And so, but apparently they're really not up to speed to really be trained at that level yet. And so they're getting thrown back into these battles and unprepared for conflict and suffering very high casualties. So I think it's another reason why this, and there's also a movement, apparently some of the women are saying that, that people have been deployed on the front for the whole, almost 2 years of this war now, is it's about time for them to be rotated out and brought back and let somebody else do it. And of course, that's not too practical because these are the ones that have survived are their most experienced fighters. And that would probably too greatly weaken their combat capability. So that's kind of the way the war is going. So I don't expect to see a lot, although as the debate in Congress rages on about the U.S. border versus aid for Ukraine, and the $61 billion hasn't been forthcoming, and the Russians are procuring large amounts of artillery shells and missiles and stuff from North Korea as well as their own production. It isn't looking very positive for Ukraine. And I was reading an article where somebody was suggesting that maybe the solution is a truce. But I think I don't believe that Russia is interested in a truce or a ceasefire without a bit more of a political settlement than that, because that just sets them up for the Ukrainian military to be built up to a much better combat capability and then be unleashed on them again, unless this is seen as a necessity for Putin to win his election in March. And even then, if there was a short-term truce, that wouldn't have much of an impact beyond March. And presumably the conflict would probably break out again. So at least that seems to be the case. So anyway, that's kind of it for now. I just thought I would kind of update on what I see the situation as being, and we'll see how well what all the developments are. And I'll of course be posting this on Rumble as well as YouTube. And the addresses of my social media accounts are in the description below. I've been posting a bit more frequently on X recently, so you can follow me there as well. Until next time.